Wedding Bells Ahead by Arletta Richardson. Chapter 14. Len's Choice. On Friday afternoon, Len went to Edenville to get Sarah Jane while I got ready to go home. This was such a special occasion that all three of us were anxious to be on the way. Len would have to be home for Sunday, but Mr. Clark would bring Sarah Jane and me back to school. Today, we didn't let Regal waste any time ambling along the road. We covered the distance as quickly as possible. "You can't let me off at my place," Sarah Jane said as we neared her lane. "I won't live another 10 minutes if I don't know what that baby is. I hate calling it an it." "Pa will pay for this," I said. As soon as the buggy stopped, I jumped down and ran into the house, with Len and Sarah Jane right behind me. Ma was sitting up in bed, smiling happily, and I rushed over to hug her. "Are you all right, Ma? Is the baby all right?" "We're both fine," she laughed. "Haven't you thought of a name for her yet?" "Then it is a girl." "Why, of course. Didn't Pa tell you that?" Ma looked perplexed. I whirled around to see Pa standing in the doorway, grinning broadly. "Why, no," he said innocently. "I didn't think I had to. Mabel said she knew that it would be a girl." "Why, Jim, what a thing to do," Ma chided. I threw my arms around his neck. "You don't know how I've suffered these last 2 days." "When are you going to come and look at her?" Sarah Jane said. "It's been my experience that 4-day-old babies have faces you could kiss only if you were related to them, but this one is different. She's actually pretty." It was true. As I bent over the cradle, I thought I had never seen a more beautiful baby. A soft, dark fuzz covered her head, and her eyelashes curled against round, smooth cheeks. "Are her eyes blue, Ma?" "They are at the moment," Ma replied. "Dark blue. They may change later." "So, what are we going to call her?" "Violet," I replied. "She looks like a little flower." "That's a pretty name," Ma agreed. "Do you like that, Pa?"
"Yes," Pa said with a nod. "But I can tell you right now that she'll never be a shrinking violet. Wait till you hear her yell. Has a mind of her own already." "If it's all right with you, I'll retreat home before she gives a demonstration," Sarah Jane laughed. "She's a wonderful baby, Mrs. O'Dell. She'll keep you young for a long time."
"I'll take Sarah Jane home and be right back to help you with the chores," Len said. "And I'll get supper tonight," I told Pa, "although you don't deserve it." After they had left, I sat down to talk with Ma. "Have the boys been here?" I asked. "Oh, yes. I think they're both glad they aren't home any longer. Roy still remembers what a trial you were." "I hope he has 5 daughters," I said cheerfully. "It would take at least that many to make his life as miserable as he made mine." The weekend passed quickly, and I could see that Ma wasn't going to lack for plenty to do in the months ahead. Although we hadn't discussed it beforehand, neither Len nor I mentioned his possible change of profession to Pa or Ma. I think we both knew in our hearts that they would be disappointed. "If the things you worry about the most never happen, I'm going to throw my whole heart into this one," I told Sarah Jane on Sunday. "Jerome wants an answer before Christmas, but actually I'm trying not to worry. I've committed it to the Lord and I'll accept the result."
"That's a good idea," Sarah Jane agreed. "But I think Len needs to know how you feel too. He should at least understand that you wouldn't mind being a preacher's wife if that's what the Lord wants."
"I'm sure he knows that. I've certainly tried to show him that I think the ministry is important." The next 2 weeks were pandemonium. Regular classes were all but abandoned as the children learned their parts and put the pageant together. I had little opportunity to reflect on the fact that Len was unusually quiet and subdued till his mother mentioned it to me. "I hope Len isn't worrying about something," she said. "He's so preoccupied that I have to speak to him twice to get an answer. Does he have something on his mind that you know of?" "He hasn't talked anything over with me," I replied truthfully. "The program is taking a lot of his spare time. I'm sure things will get back to normal when that's over." I needed to believe that, for my sake as well as hers. The schoolhouse was packed on the evening of the program. Some who hadn't been near the school in years arrived, eager to renew memories of the past. The children did a beautiful job of portraying their ancestors and bringing a century of history alive. Old Mrs. Gage and Grandpa Elliott were honored as the oldest former students, and as a special surprise, Mr. Roswell, who had rebuilt the school 17 years before, appeared and officially appointed a delighted Toby Elliott to be in charge of opening the cornerstone in 1975. When the last excited child and family had disappeared into the night, I sat down wearily at my desk. "I think I'll come in tomorrow to clean up," I said to Len. "I just don't have the energy tonight. Do you suppose you could bank the fire so it won't take too long to get warm in the morning?" He nodded and turned to the stove, and I looked around the empty room. Our program had been a huge success. "Len," I said, "during the Christmas holidays, we need to set the date for our wedding. I know we don't have a house yet, but we could stay with your folks while we get it ready, couldn't we?" Len had his back to me, and he didn't reply for a long moment. When he did, I was sure that I hadn't heard correctly. "Mabel, I can't go through with it." You what?" "I've known for a long time, but I haven't had the heart to tell you." He turned to look at me miserably. Can you forgive me?" I thought my breath would never start again. When it did, I said weakly, "Are you going to marry someone else?" Alarm spread across his face. "Marry someone? Are you crazy? I'd never marry anyone but you." Then it dawned on him, and he strode across the room and took me in his arms. "Oh, Mabel, how could you even imagine such a thing? I didn't mean I couldn't marry you." I began to sob with relief, and Len patted me awkwardly on the back. "Then what can't you do?" I gulped. "Jerome's offer," he answered. "I can't accept Jerome's offer. I know you've been planning on a big house and all, but I couldn't live with myself if I rejected God's call for all the wealth of this world. I shouldn't have even considered it." I slumped back in my chair. "Oh, Len," I said, "I never wanted all those things. I wanted you to stay in the church." "You did? But why didn't you say so?" "You seemed so happy and excited that I couldn't," I replied. "If you really wanted the partnership, I didn't want to stand in the way." "I thought I could make up to you what you were losing by not marrying Russ Bradley," Len said. "Russ Bradley?" I exclaimed. "Oh, Len, it's you I chose. I don't care if we have to live in a tent." "I hope that won't be necessary, Mabel, but I know we'll be happy if the Lord is pleased with our lives." "This will be the best Christmas I've ever had," I told him. "I feel as though a load had been lifted from my shoulders." Len regarded me soberly. "I hope we've learned a lesson," he said. "I'll never assume that I know what you're thinking again." "When will you let Jerome know?" I asked. "Let's go see him tomorrow," Len decided. "I hate to let him down, but it's a matter of conscience. I can't compromise." Our visit to the Graysons was an interesting one. Jerome had the plans for the new lumber mill spread out on a table in his office, and he eagerly pointed out the location of all the buildings and equipment. "We're ready to begin," he said. "I've engaged a contractor, and he's started to hire his help. This will be a going concern before you know it. Have you two chosen the section for your house? We'll clear that first." Len sat down at the table and ran his hand over the plans. "They look wonderful," he said. "This company will be a real boost to the community. Jerome, I appreciate your offer to make me a partner. More than I can say, but I'm afraid I have to decline. I'm sorry, but I already have a task I'm called to do." Jerome looked startled. Then he studied Len quietly. After a moment, he turned and looked out the window. "Perhaps I shouldn't admit this," Jerome said finally, "but I suspected that's what you would say. I've watched your life and your commitment to what I thought was a foolish endeavor. I always believed people were out to get all they could, however they could. But you were so sure that Miss Harris and Frank Gage weren't like that, and events proved you correct. Jerome went over and sat down behind his desk. You're the kind of man I'd like to be in business with, Len, he continued. But I think I would have been disappointed if you had said yes. You really believe what you say about the Christian life. And I'd like to believe too. Len was quiet on the way home. To think that greed could have cost me the opportunity to lead someone to the Lord, he said. God can use Jerome in the lumber mill, but that isn't where God wants me. How close I came to making a wrong choice. He squeezed my hand and smiled at me. I didn't make a wrong choice when I lifted you out of the path of that goat, did I? No, you didn't, I replied. But I'd be just as happy if you and Sarah Jane would not choose to remind me of it quite so often. End of chapter 14.